all in the Christmas spirit. So I won't hold you up any further, and we'll go straight on to apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies.
It's good turnout today. Two then, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. No, although we could all say we got something because we're always on the road, aren't we? And then item 3 then is minutes to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record, pages 1 to 3. I'll go through page 1, page 2, page 3, the minutes as a whole. All agreed? Thank you very much. And then straight on to the report on item 4, which is Highways Asset Management Plan. Andrew, do you want to say a few words first?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll be brief on this because I'll hand you over to the very capable hands of Bob Fenwick in our Highways team. So just wanted to thank the committee for bringing this forward as a discussion point. As we know, this is a forward-looking committee, and so I am interested in hearing the views of the members sitting opposite me here, yourself, Chair, and those online. As you can see, it's an extremely comprehensive report that covers one of our most valuable assets within the highway infrastructure, and I just want to put on record my thanks to the entire Highways team, from lighting, highways, bridges, every single involvement who's had a hand in pulling together this report. It's important for the committee to remember that this is an evolving report, and it will be updated as we go along. But yes, I'm interested in everyone's comments, and I'll pass over to Bob Fenwick to formally introduce the technical side of the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you for the nice introduction. I hope you don't let you down. Highway asset management planning has been around for 10, 15 years in a really good sense. It's been a piece of work that's been done across Wales by a combined group of all councils that have signed up to a development group to look at how we do things well, how we don't do things well. The Highway asset management plan has been worked on across the 22 authorities. It comes from recommendations from a lot of different reports, recommendations from Welsh Government, various financial recommendations, reports on a whole from a whole different set of backgrounds. The purpose of it is basically originally to review how we did things, to see what we knew about what we knew, to find out what we actually knew about our networks. And it started off when I first became involved in various things, just like working out how long the network was and how many roads we had. So it's developed over time. A lot of good and useful tools have been developed across the All Wales group. We've come up with a framework for the asset management plan that recommends lots of good practice. Well, I think we're one of 3 or 4 authorities that have still got an active asset management plan. And to be fair, we haven't had one for 3 or 4 years because the demands of putting it together are quite substantial. It was hinted that Welsh Government might require an asset management plan to be present before they'll give grants out in future, because they want to encourage this. So it's that important to them. For us, it's a review of what we do, and it puts structures and procedures in place to look at quite a high level of how we manage things. The report itself is just literally a copy of the background and the introduction from the actual Appendix A, which is the main report. Sets out where it comes from, why we do it, how we're doing it, legal implications, etc. Highways probably got an asset value in the region of 2 billion. So it's a huge amount of money. Although you could argue whether it's an asset at all, it could only be seen as the opposite, as a cost. And obviously how that fits into audit terms and how that fits into financial reporting is quite an interesting one, but it's not for here. I'm going to go on to the document itself. Includes a forward in it again, which explains where it all comes from and how we work together on it. The basic format is due for sign off by Andrew and my head of service, Stuart Davis, just on a final check. It's been enacted by a council document from some 10 or so years ago, where the first asset management plan was put in place. It was signed off by politicians that this will be a document that sits amongst others that the highways service will manage and maintain, to give them authorization to do various things to how we manage and how we run the service. Looking through the introduction, it mentions budgets, it mentions how we do strategies, what we're looking for. There's talk of like whole life costing. So we look at that rather than reactive first repair. Historically, and I've said this many times, it's all a question of balance. Historically, we've always looked at the roads that are in the worst condition, we fix them. That's not the cheapest way to maintain the network over a long period of time. The more we can do with preventative measures, the better. A good practice suggests 60 to 70% preventative work will be the best for the network long term. But how you explain to the public while you're doing a road that's in better condition than the one that's outside their house, and you're bringing it up to a nice standard when theirs is actually much worse to start with, is quite a difficult argument sometimes. But the purpose is to maintain the overall network condition, and to do that, you've got to look at preventative work. You wouldn't look in your house. You wouldn't wait till a wall starts crumbling before painting it, because then you've got to do polyfill, you've got to do replastering, you've got to do all these things. You try and keep it into a good state of repair the whole time. And this is effectively what we're trying to do with the network. Although having a network that's in, could be said in some cases, a poor condition in areas, challenging budgets, it's not always easy. So sometimes we have to do worst first, purely to keep roads open. I said the work has all been done in conjunction with all Welsh authorities and most of the Scottish authorities as well. It was a joint working group between the two countries. I feel that we're probably 3 to 4 years ahead of the English authorities. A lot of what we've done was finished before the English authorities really started their asset management project. Principles are about long-term spending, trying to look at a sort of reduction and stakeholder involvement and showing transparency. So if somebody reports to us to say that a road is in poor condition, can I resurface it? We score it. We don't just say, yes, no, it's in bad condition, we'll see if we can. What we've got now is a set of factors, and we look at scoring the road to make it clear why we're doing this one and not this one. And it's not always a good thing to hear, that your road's not the most important in the world, but it does show that we're trying to be consistent. Political boundaries don't make any difference. It's things like network use, whether it's close to a hospital, the actual traffic flow on the road. If it's a road in and out of a village, like an access road into Horton, that's the only access to that village, will obviously have more importance. So it's a number of factors that score. We do include scores for the public reporting things. So if a number of people report this to it, it will bump the score. If councillors report us problems, that will bump the score. And we then give the whole thing an assessed value. We look at what work could be undertaken on it. We cost it up and we add that to our list. This is where we get our list of, when I talk about the backlog, our backlog's somewhere in the region of 70 to 75 million. That is based on the roads that we have seen that need work, scored up with the current costs of the day, over the area that we feel needs doing. So it's a genuine figure. If we were to use the figures that are statistically available through the asset management project, the value is a lot higher, but we don't feel those are realistic. We feel it's a statistical model, and we've been reporting the same way for a number of years. So we didn't want to change that because it gives us consistency and standard. The main reason for the backlog figure rising, we feel that condition of the roads has actually remained pretty stable over the last 10 years. The cost increase, I think, from 8 years ago when we did the last full document, was around 50 million. Now, if you look at inflation and the cost of tarmac over that time, the differences are huge. And just those costs allowed in materials for the number of schemes we got is easily enough to push the price up. So even though it looks like the backlog is increasing, it's down to inflation factors, materials, the cost of tarmac since the Ukraine situation. A lot of bitumen products were coming out of Eastern Europe. They've all got a lot more expensive. So it's a look at everything in terms of cost, condition, again, balance. The document itself goes on to outline a number of other documents because it's intended to be an outline, an overarching document. The idea of which mean that this document won't be repeated again for probably another 10 years, although we'll tweak it and it is a living document. But it refers to all the other documents that we use or we produce on a regular basis. So it sets that standard or that suite of documents we use. They're not all complete at the moment, but those that aren't complete are next stages. So, for instance, it looks at the winter service plan, how we do winter maintenance, gritting. It looks at safety inspection policy, how we do road safety inspections. But those documents are all linked into this one. The forward works program, we've been producing 5-year programs for a number of years. We're reducing that to a 3-year program now because we feel a 3-year program is more reactive, and over 5 years a lot can change. So it shows you how we connect together all our other plans and statements. We produce an annual state of support. That's more of a technical job document, a lot of statistics in it. But a part of that, we try to model the ongoing condition of the network compared to what we're spending. So we'll look at each time we'll look at what we require for a steady state to maintain the network as is. And then we'll suggest, well, if you give us this much funding, this will be the way the network improves. This will be how it works if we change to reactive resurfacing or if we do more preventative. So it tries to show a statistical model of it's based on condition factors, the actual costs of roads, and it shows us how we would spend various different amounts of budget. And to be frank, it's been fairly useful for us arguing this when we come to a point to say, well, why do you need more money? Well, actually, if you give us another 2 million quid, the overall networking condition will improve by 0.5%. And those figures sound like large sums of money for very small gain, but we're talking about 1,500 kilometres of footway and 1,000 kilometres of road. So every bit of work we do is small in comparison to the size of the network. After that, we got a small section on growth and the additional challenges. There's a small amount of traffic growth. I don't think it's a huge factor for us. But if, for instance, you change when the Liberty Stadium was put in, that changed the flow of traffic around that area. So we try and account for those sort of things. And when that happens, we review the network in the vicinity to say, well, actually, there's more traffic on this one, therefore the priority goes up a little bit. So it's how we sort of try and balance those changes. There's a big issue with climate, obviously. We suffer from marginal temperatures in Swansea, wet weather and freeze-thaw action. Now, we saw this last year. This week alone, the last 2 nights I've been on call, and the temperatures have been about 0.1 to minus 0.2. So the temperatures have gone up and down and up and down, above freezing, below freezing, and that damages the roads. So although we don't see ice, we don't see snow, the situation for our roads is actually quite bad, where it freeze thaws all the time. And if you think back to your high school geography or geology, you'll think about freeze thaw action, about how mountains deteriorate. If you start looking at a road that's got small pores on it, water gets into it and it fractured. So this is one of the reasons this time of year now is becoming severe for us. And over Christmas, we expect a bit of deterioration. So we put a bit of money aside that we can do some extra repairs before the end of the financial year, and then crack on next year again. The other issue with traffic and growth, electric vehicles. That's something we're going to look at in the future because electric vehicles are generally heavier. That puts more wear and tear on a road, particularly where there's traffic calming. Where electric vehicles accelerate and brake faster, that puts more damage on a road. So it's sort of monitoring to see how this has an effect on the network. But we do expect it to have a network problem, say particularly in those areas that have got a lot of traffic calming. So from a maintenance point of view, I understand the need for them, but we'd rather see less because it damages my roads, and I get quite personal about that. We look a little bit about customer expectations. The difficulty with this for us is if we put surveys out every time we resurface a road, they come back as 90% excellent because those people have just had a new road, which is easy. And if we do reports on the pothole initiative, most of those come back pretty good because most people like having what they've done reported fixed. It's difficult then to do surveys within the rest of the network because the rest of the network is where we're not doing anything, and they always tend to come up bad. So it's quite a difficult area for us. We still consult on it with others to see how they're doing things, and we take surveys occasionally, but it's usually work related. And I can't say I complain that the most of the surveys come back very well very good in our favour, because obviously that makes us look good. But it is because we've done something. I'm a realist about that, and you do have to look at other factors. But it's a small element for us. I think we get our real feedback from the complaints we get when things go wrong, and that's our main feedback from the public. So we're never. There's a few councillors that contact me regularly about issues. Yeah, but I don't mind that, because that actually tells us where things are happening, and that actually gives us good feedback, and that's what we need. So if there's somebody that's not telling us there's a problem, that problem doesn't get fixed and doesn't go away. So feedback is a good thing for me, but it's difficult to do consultations. If we look through performance, the document sets out how each part of our service does our performance measures. Now, for me in maintenance, we use the Association of Public Sector Excellence. We feed back all our scores into a template that they've got, and it's mainly Welsh and Scottish councils, with probably 20% of the English councils taking part. I can't say why that is, but certainly within Wales and Scotland, it's very well taken up. We feedback every year on that, and we get a standing report of how we do, and we're usually mid-table. Does tend to favour the Scottish authorities a little bit, but it does mean to say that we're monitoring and we're looking at other councils. One of our comparators is Plymouth, for instance, similar size city, similar coastal region, more money to spend because in the English authority, but or maybe that's a perception, but it gives us a comparator. Highways in general, we have national indicators. Engineering services, they use the Welsh data unit, as do traffic and transportation. So each part of our service is monitored, reported back across performance compared against other councils, and we look for trends there, and we look for things where maybe we're not doing quite so well, or how we can explain that. And a good example of that would be the gully services we do. We are always the bottom of the table when it comes to gully emptying. I've actually done a report on this at the National Advocacy Conference, because I don't think that's a bad thing. In this case, it's because we're more expensive, because we stay at a drain until it's working. There are some councils that do this thing called splash and dash. They want them to do 40 gullies a day, so they go out and they do 40 gullies a day, but they spend 5 minutes at each one, and none of them are actually working. So it's about how you report the statistics, and for us, we always make a fuss of that we stay until it's fixed, unless it's really broken, and obviously we've got to book in work programs and stuff. I know I've got a team that's been 3 days at the moment on one particular job that's caused some flooding, and they haven't left. So, you know, their turnover for the first 3 days of the week is 1 gully. That obviously puts the price up. But as long as I can explain the reasons behind our performance, I think it's all good news. More information that you get, the better. Okay, it goes through then. The document goes through various assets. The main assets are carriageways, which is where the bulk of the money is, footways, structures, public lighting, and telematics or traffic lights. So for each of these, it says how we do the work, how we've looked at it, how we're trying to improve. Budget requirements, what we require for sort of steady state, or what I've taken a snapshot of like 2024, 25 of what the current values are in terms of budgets, etc. But there's no intention to try and do a large survey of that in this document. That's more for the annual documents. But it mentions sort of a couple of the major issues, like for instance, energy with public lighting. The fact that we've just about finished the LED transfer now. So I'd say 95% of our lights are now moved over to LEDs. And we certainly should be able to finish the rest of them. The intention was to finish them by the end of this year. It explains a little bit more about that. Some of the documentation in terms of carriageways and the products we use. We've looked, because we've been asked to, at sort of recycled products. We've tried recycling previously. We're looking at carbon emissions. And on one hand, I would prefer to use an old-fashioned material like hot rolled asphalt. If you remember the days as a kid when you're traveling in the summer and there's chip-ins flying everywhere and everyone's cars' windows are getting smeared with tar as you drive past roadworks. That stuff is brilliant because it lasts for 30 years. We have no modern materials, anything like as good. But if you imagine trying to put that on the Mumbles Road or through the, so and it's only when we do big schemes, Boulevard, HRA, we've got it done as part of the works. So we try and protect that from getting dug up. But it's a balance. Where we have to resurface, we use modern materials, and we're trying to use what's called warm tarmac against hot tarmac. So it's cooler. So there's much less carbon used in its production. And we use chemicals then to try and increase the workability of it to make it more malleable when we're actually laying it. So we don't need the heat. That's something like a 40% reduction in carbon. We're not able at the moment to produce statistical information on this because there isn't an agreed method of reporting on carbon reductions across our sector. Although that is something, again, the asset management project is looking at. So it's trying to evaluate ways that we can all report our carbon figures statistically and equally. Met with a contractor yesterday who was saying that his product is very, very good at reducing carbon and it's carbon neutral and the rest of it, but against what basis and on what set of statistics does that work? So we need to understand what these, that we're looking at an equal playing field. So the document then goes through the different assets, explains how we do each one, how we're looking at where we are, and then it turns to risks. And again, main risks for me, weather, the change in climate, the amount of flooding we're having. If you look at sinkholes as an example, and you've all seen the sinkholes on the news recently, it used to be we would get maybe 5 or 6 minor sinkholes or something where the ground's washed away a little bit through groundwater, and maybe 2 or 3 slightly bigger ones during the year. So maybe 8 in total. I would say now that we get more like 30 to 40 a year. Good example of a sinkhole in Pennard a couple of weeks ago. We can't agree with Welsh Water whose cause it was, but groundwater washes sand away, the road collapses. Now this is happening where it used to happen, I say 2 or 3 times a year to any significant nature. This might be 15 to 20 times now. And that's because the intensity of rainfall, groundwater moving in different ways and affecting things that haven't been affected before. So again, that's a bit of a demand because each one of those jobs is quite expensive. Flooding properties, we do reports on it, and obviously there's a lot of expectation from the public that we'll fix flooding. But obviously our priority and our responsibility is to the highway. So where somebody's house is flooded, not easy as an out of hours manager to attend, to speak to them, to say, well, look, we're very sorry, but actually it's not our responsibility. We obviously try and help where we can. We provide sandbags, things like this. Going forward, we've looked at providing community sandbags to certain piles for those councillors that have reacted to us. And we're looking to keep that going if we can, if I can manage the funding. But again, we're looking at preventative works. So where we've seen that the areas that are causing us concern over flooding, we have a predictive rainfall forecast now each day that tells us where it's going to rain heaviest, so we can focus on those areas. And one of our gully teams will do preventative emptying. So using Calais Square as an example, the roundabout there that floods on heavy rain, we do a preventative clean now. So when we get a heavy rain warning in that area, we will go up and clean all the gullies the day before it happens. We feel this has probably saved at least 3 or 4 flooding events. And although that doesn't affect houses, obviously it closes the road and causes a lot of problem for people with that importance of the network. So there's a lot of that sort of preventative work going on. Improvement plans, we've talked about those in the document. It's one of the documents I need to work on. We've done improvement plans before that tend to be a bit lip service, and we've sort of half worked for them. What I want to get is a document that actually tells us what we are going to do, what we're trying to do, and we focus on those things rather than just maybe putting some things down that sound good and we should be doing, but nobody across the authority or across the service within all authorities has really done. So we're trying to look at realistic targets and producing. There's on Appendix A of the document, there's a list of all the other documents that I've referenced earlier to explain what they do and where they come from. Some of these are new. As I say, some of them aren't complete yet, but it's something we're working on. But it hopefully gives you a much better holistic overview of what we're doing across the board. I think that's it really. That's the document in its nature. Happy to take questions or
Thank you, Bob. Very extensive report there, and I know, well, as you're talking about highways, it is massive. Not only the work, the maintenance side of it, it's, you'll never get to the end of it. Anyway, nobody else wants to come in before I ask members, no? No. You must have done well, not one of them have come in, Bob. Yeah, Andrew?
No, I just wanted to thank Bob again for that comprehensive introduction. As I did say, briefly allude to before he took the report, what he doesn't know about highways infrastructure is not worth knowing, I'll be honest. So, yeah, no, thanks for such a comprehensive. Just to go on the weather monitoring data, you know, I've seen the work that goes on behind the scenes and in the run up to some of these wet weather events, which unfortunately are becoming all more common. It's outstanding, and I just put my reckoning thanks to all the teams across the council over the weekend, as you know, with the works that were done in terms of dealing with the fallout of the storm and during is absolutely outstanding. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think we'll all echo that anyway. You know, tremendous amount of work. And the point is, when something happens to somebody, you've got to be there within the hour, because that's what they expect us as councillors to do. But anyway, Mike White first.
Thank you, Bob. It's a very comprehensive word and endorse the comments. And also, could you pass on my thanks to the teams that were out during the storm? They've done a first-class job, sterling job. They are really a good ambassador for this council, the way that they go about their duties and what they have to do and deal with in extreme weather. Right, in regards to the report, Bob, 2.4 traffic. Could you just ask, if possible, we get issues with damage caused through traffic or items being placed on the carriageway? For instance, like we get builder skips and things like that, which does cause damage, which does deteriorate the road. What process have we got in place to make these people accountable if we know that there's damage being caused by there? And then if we can move on to 3.1, Bob, in regards to the customer sorry, Bob.
Sorry, I thought there was a second point coming.
Yeah, customer consultation expectations. In regards to the complaints, have you got a system of key performance indicators in place so you can know that how the complaints have been monitored, and is a system for tracking for there, and also in regards to the highway, and plus we know that there's new planning legislation coming shortly about where we have got issues where if a development comes ahead and gets permission, the developer haven't always got to adopt that highway. I think it's through a 278 agreement, I think, Bob, my memory serves me right. And whether plus there might be any sort of process within the new legislature that it makes the developer, they got to adopt it to that standard of the local authority. I know, because there's they're pushing forward now to get more houses built there. And also, when you go to look at the program, you said I think it's on up to 2035 now, is it, of the network and that. When they go to the car inspect, obviously you said it's the scoring, but have you got a matrix in place, so, or is it, or a RAG system where members know exactly what's happening within the awards, because they get any complaints that come in, they can advise constituents as and when if work is going to be carried out within those areas. And last point, Bob, in regards to public lighting, I think it's page on section 7. We've got a lot of cut down lampposts across the city. Are there any plans for the removal of them? That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
You got quite a few there, Bob. Do you want to answer them, or do you want Stuart to come in
If,
and have a?
if Stuart likes to take any of those on, I'm quite happy to pass over to him. But
No, Stuart Rice is next. Good more
Because I
questions.
read the report. Bob.
I'd rather answer those
Okay,
first if I
off you go
can. Okay, damage. There are rules in place for damage. It can be difficult. Really good example is verge damage. It can be quite obvious who's caused it, but unless we've got witness statements to say that actual damage happened at that actual time, very, very difficult to take through courts. You might know it's a certain individual parking outside the house every single day, but unless you see that one day that the rut is caused, we do lean on developers. If we see someone doing something, we can catch them parked on the grass. We tend to lean on builders, etc., to pay for reinstatements. With other things like skips all under license. Anything that happens, damage through a skip, we should be able to recover. And our streetworks team are very, very good at recovering money. This year, particularly, we've taken several £100,000 from statutory undertakers on old issues whether we're arguing with them. So whether it's they haven't done a reinstatement properly or it's just been knocked to code, it's something that our streetworks team are very, very good at. They manage skips and they will go after people. For instance, if a builder is seen putting cement down a drain and we get a witness statement to say that, we'll go after them, we'll clean the drain and we'll recharge them for the costs. It's not something that happens frequently because it's difficult to catch, but whenever we do, we like to do it. It's something that obviously I'd much rather persecute a builder or prosecute, sorry, rather than persecute, but either way, I'd go for a builder that does damage to the highway rather than spend a lot of time digging up the cement that then solidifies in a pipe under the road. If we can catch them and clean them. A builder asked me once, how long has this been a problem? I've been building all my life, and I explained to him that it came in 1980 with the Highways Act. But the reason we're much more keen on it now is because drainage is much more important, and you can't afford pipes to be blocked. Other damage, anything else that is damage done to the highway, we can go after people, but it's not something I've done more than a couple of times in my tenure because it's very difficult to do, difficult to prove. KPIs, customers, the performance data I was talking about, those are all key performance indicators. We tend to focus on statistical ones like the condition of the road. So we can tell you what the condition of A roads are year on year on year, going historically. And that is done by a technical survey. The number of gullies cleaned, the number of complaints received, the number of potholes repaired within time. We have all those type of statistics by the bucket load. In terms of actual satisfaction, as I said, it's very difficult to manage. Very difficult to get a true opinion. One person will think you're rubbish and send numerous responses in to say as much because we haven't done the road outside their house. Whereas actually we're trying to look as a network at a whole. So it's not easy and always willing to take suggestions, but we do have a set of indicators that are agreed nationally. I used to sit on the performance committee that represented Wales up in Manchester when we used to go to look at all the national indicators. So we've had some input in them being developed. And I think they're generally as good as we can get, but I'm quite happy to take interest in it. It's something I'm interested in. Developer adoptions. Obviously, I'd much rather have all roads adopted because then we know that all roads are up to standard and all roads are built that won't give us problems. I would have to take guidance on that. It's not my area on what we can force or what we can't. We'd obviously prefer them. And when a road is to be adopted, we do check to make sure it's to the right standards. But there's obviously a lot of demand in terms of planning for houses and placemaking and all these things to make the areas nice, which don't always sit with me. I'd like a boxy estate with black roads, no grass, and nice and easy to maintain, but it wouldn't be a great place to live. So I'm quite glad I'm not in that sort of area. A matrix in terms of schools and work in an area. Now, as I said, when we look at every road that gets reported to us, we assess, we look at its condition, we try and look at the factors then, whether it's on a bus route, whether it's on a school run, a school route, the traffic flow on the network. We look at those things to score it, to see how important it is, and we will take some scoring points from councillors and the public. That gives us a score. What we don't do is generally issue that, because that is a changing document day to day. And you might issue it to you and there'll be 900 roads on there, and of which maybe 100 of them haven't been seen for 6 months and have changed significantly. So we don't generally issue that. We generally ask you to ask us for a condition report on a particular road, and then we will feedback and tell you it's in 60th place, and actually there's £3.5 million worth of work needed before we get to it. That doesn't mean to say it won't be done. That's the order on the sheet, and sometimes we will have to jump the order because we're doing a particular type of work, and if that work needs a programme, then we'll look down the scheme for the next bit of work that needs that type. So we'll try and gather things together for efficiencies. But that would be my answer there. If you want to know the condition of a particular road, ask us. We'll tell you about that particular road. If you want a list of all the roads that are in your ward that are on our list, I don't have an issue with giving that to you, but I give them in priority order of what their scores are. But I wouldn't want to break them down particularly in terms of detail. It just creates too much work, and we haven't got that sort of background resource to do it. But yeah, if you want a list of the roads that are in your ward that are on our watch list, so to speak, I can do that. And then if there's anything missing, let us know and we'll score it.
Mike.
Sorry, Bob. No, as I say, I think it's important that we have got that dialogue. Because I know this stress is something, as you said earlier on, with the frost and the bad weather coming up, where we are going to be prone to more sort of potholes appearing and whatever, but it's just that, we have got this sort of link then, in a sense.
I think it follows the process what we do for the SRS programme, formerly known as Patch. With that, obviously, we consult each time. We say, what do you want us to do? These are the roads we think we'd like to do. And some of those will always come from our programme. There is a catch to that if we do something on Patch, sometimes, obviously, the condition of the road improves and it drops down the list. But I think that's fair and reflective of what we do. Your last one was about public lighting.
Yeah, we're going to jump in for them, do.
No, am I okay to come in on that point, Chair? Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, yeah, in terms of that, there are comments fed in from members into the system anyway. I mean, I get a regularly email by members about particular roads in their wards. In fact, with 4 of them sitting opposite me here now. So that those are fed into the system as well now, but there is obviously the point scoring system. And in terms on Patch, small resurfacing scheme, perfectly fine into calling it whatever. The whole point of potentially rebranding, not rebranding, but just trying to say what it actually is, whereas we were trying to differentiate from the pothole pledge and what is done with the surfacing act, because the patch works, or the patch scheme, priority action community team highways, is it?
Yeah, it was a made up word to fit the word patch. But
it's a small resurfacing scheme. It's a full resurface. They sometimes can do, sometimes they'll do full widths of road, large lengths footways and things like that. So it's akin to almost a full resurface, but on a smaller scale. So that was the thinking behind it, to try and get those differentiations in between the different styles of work, all relevant, all make up the highway infrastructure, whether it's reactive or what have you, or to extend the life. So it's just as important.
Yeah, I think the point there is patch was always structural work. It was structural resurfacing of a road in small areas up to about 80 to 100 square metres on a particular road, whereas patching tends to be small patches on a road, and there was confusion between the two, hence the name change. Patch works really well for us. We've had it for a long time, so it is it constantly referenced, hence the sort of formerly known as comment. Public lighting, columns and cut downs, yeah. We have a budget for capital replacement, and we have a budget for revenue replacement. We have been very, very successful with bidding for grants, etc., to replace the LEDs. These are all done now, or virtually all done. Obviously, that would be our next priority, is to look at cut downs. Where a lighting column is cut down, unless it's been completely powered off and removed from the network, we still pay for it in terms of energy. So we are quite keen to get them removed. It's done on a statistical numbers. Basically, we report how many lighting columns we've got, and just because the lighting column's broken doesn't mean to say we can avoid paying for it. But there are bypasses, for instance, that have had lighting columns cut down for a while. The intention is, if whatever funding we can get, to start programs of work to gradually either remove or replace them, depending on what's necessary. Where it's large sections that were cut down deliberately, then obviously those will be just taken out. Yeah, it's a priority for us. Public lighting manager John's always after money to do this, but obviously money's limited, and when new money comes in, where do you put it? Do you put it in the roads? Do you put it in structures? Public lighting did have some extra money this year towards capital work. It's the same for their cable network. We're one of the very few authorities that have our own cable network for lighting, so we don't pay for that through National Grid. But that cable network is old, and again, that needs upgrading. So there's a couple of things, and it's mentioned in the document on public lighting. It's certainly something that will be brought up every year on our annual status report for public lighting, to see how we're doing, how much we've done, and what the outstanding balance is. Okay.
Yeah, most of these are in the report anyway. But what it does say, another 3-year program you've got on lighting. Are the replacement columns in that 3-year report? The ones that have been cut down?
The ones that will be replaced will be in the 3-year report. That the three-year report is being put together at the moment. Yeah. Okay,
thanks. Councillor Rice, I wouldn't say Stuart then, but Stuart Davis will jump in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say at the very beginning of this, reflecting on the comments that everyone else said, that the team did an amazing job beyond your team and across over the weekend, and I think they need to be congratulated to that. And I also wanted to thank you personally, Bob, and your team, because I find, and the approach you've taken with this as well, I found it's been very helpful, very positive. Almost anything that you ask the team to do, they will try their very best to do. I know some of the problems that you face sometimes, Bob and the team, is the other partner organisations, utility companies and people like that. So if there's an outstanding issue, it tends to be because of the utility company, not because of the department itself. I really welcome the idea of bringing forward this highway asset management plan again. And I've been looking forward to seeing some of the other documents that come off the back of that as well, because I think that's really good. I was actually quite heartened to see that there's only £75 million worth of backlog. I imagined a much higher amount. There's a few different questions I thought that I'd like to ask about it, or things I think might need to be considered. First one, just picking up from what Councillor White was saying, I think with us looking at the LDP now and potential for supplementary planning guidance, it's worth looking at what we can do to strengthen the situation when it comes to the standard of highways and lighting on estates when they're built, so they're ready for adoption. Unfortunately, and I know this is something the national government is quite keen to do, and the previous government was looking at, but I think this government will actually do something about, is the fact that people are held over as leaseholders on land with large management costs and things like that, which and it's usually based on the fact that, we have to maintain the road and we have to maintain lights. Well, if you did it to an adoptable standard in the first place, there would be none of these costs. So that's one. Second thing, which is a little bit linked to the future plans, I think it'd be worth us looking at having a settled policy in terms of EV charging, because there's definitely a link to the highways, how they're maintained. Other councils have at least piloted or introduced things with EV charging. I know that there are difficulties with it. There are issues to do with cables going across the highway and carriageway. And I suppose it links into one of the comments that you made about lighting, that our lighting is a different sort or wiring than most authorities have, where most authorities can use their public lighting to help with that issue as well of EV charging. So it might be worth thinking for the future. Excellent and well done getting to 95% on LED. I mean, that's something that should be definitely congratulated, and I think that's a good way forward. and it's worth applauding for the council as well as department. In terms of materials going forward and resurfacing, you probably know I'm a big proponent for getting things done fully rather than partially sometimes. So I do like the old fashioned kind of asphalt approach, as it were. However, looking at new materials going forward, I've heard recently there's quite a lot of research done on, and you'd probably correct me being an engineer and me not being one, on something called Bosch slag, which is actually you can use for resurfacing purposes, and it's very good at carbon capture. So rather than actually having a carbon problem with your resurfacing, it actually captures carbon. So, and we've got loads of Bosch slag around here because you've got Tata steel, you've got everything.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity to have a look at that, and it could be a relatively inexpensive material. One thing I have noticed, and my group asked a question a few months back about the number of roads and that have been resurfaced. I know that there's been sort of peaks and troughs over the last few years with that, and that's probably, I suppose, from what you've been saying about material costs as much as anything else, and maybe the depth of what's been done. But I mean, some years there seem to be 3 times as many roads done as other years.
That was down to COVID. Other people couldn't spend the money, so they give it to us. And I think my budget for the COVID years was something like 3 times normal. So my staff in during the 2 years of COVID, we did 9 million one year and 7 the second. So like 3 times the amount of resurface we've done, all under very difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
But we did Lucky Bridge, for example, at a time when there's very few traffic, very few cars on it. So we took the option to do as many high traffic places as possible. But they worked really, really hard during that, and difficult circumstances. But that's the main reason. I would say that we lost our core Welsh Government funding, stopped some years ago. We typically got £3.5 million a year towards general road maintenance. That hurt us, but it has been refilled locally by the council as much as they can. So maybe not the whole amount every year, but virtually every year we've had additional grants and additional money where it's become available. I'm very grateful for that. It would have been very difficult without it.
So I'd certainly support further investment into the area, and I know that we've consulted with our ward residents, and we've had a very high response to a recent survey about what priorities people have. So hopefully I can share some of that with people, and if I can write to you and ask separately about the priorities within our ward, that would be great. I think there was one more thing I wanted to do, but overall it's very positive, and if we can work together and lead off this, and we have almost an expectation, I think it's Councillor White was saying, well, expecting which roads may be being addressed. It just helps us battle off the constant questions that we as members get, and I'm sorry if I'm one of those people that hassle you, Bob, emailing you, but I find you very responsive, and I find the department and the approach here is good. I just want to see, hopefully, sustain and have more investment into roads going forward so that we can get over this backlog of 75 million. And I think if we can take an approach that sees that cut back in the next 5 to 10 years, then that's got to be a positive thing.
Yeah. Just as a couple of specific points there, EV charging, I believe there was a paper brought to the last one of these committees about what we're looking at, and trials are going ahead. I don't want to go into too much detail on it because I'm only a stakeholder rather than someone driving it. Some of the big issues for me is obviously if we start allowing things to be put through channels in the highway, then that opens up the footway, and anything opening up the footway will damage it over time. I've got to worry about liability, chip claims, issues like it is illegal to put a rope or cable across the footway. So if you put a cable that's a charging cable, technically it's illegal, and if somebody complains about it, we've got to deal with it. That's all been looked, and we're waiting for Welsh Government feedback on it. But as you say, there are some authorities coming up with charging trials. I think it's going to be very necessary. I know we're looking at something, but I don't really want to go too much into that. I've been involved, but it's not my remit, so I'm quite happy to have a chat about it. The slag, carbon capture within highways. I've certainly read a few papers on it, different materials that can be included within a highway construction to bring your carbon, to soak up carbon. difficult for me is whenever we try a new resurfacing product, you've got a long feedback time before you work out if you've bought yourself a good product or a real doozy. If you look at if you go around the roads in Swansea now and you'll see a road that's got a pothole with a flat bottom to it and it's only about 40 mil deep, it's because the top coat was worn off. Now, this was a product that was fantastic in Europe. It's what we call SMA, and it's what we use, and it's porous. In this country, our tyre depth on the cars is less. Therefore, the friction on the road had to be slightly higher, so they increased the number of holes to make the friction better, which allowed water in, and we're wetter than they are. And marginal temperatures, and hey presto, you get a surface that breaks up. Obviously, over a number of years, we've adapted the product to be better. It's more durable now, it's more dense. We tend to use higher friction aggregate. The technicalities of materials in surfacing, I mean, I've been doing this for 16 years, and I'm not an expert. I know the details like this, but to put a new aggregate, because of its climate enhancements or its carbon absorption properties in a road, might be interesting to try, but I'd be very nervous about rolling it out wide scale for at least 10 years, only because you don't know what difference it'll have on the durability of the road. There are a lot of other options for carbon out there. We're looking at a carbon char product, which can be used, for instance, in French drains, and that is a carbon absorber, and that also cleans water. So if you get mine workings leaking out onto a road and you can use some of this product in a filter system, it can potentially remove some of the hydrocarbons from it. So there's lots of interesting things around, but it's a question of how much time and money you can put into them. But be interested to hear a bit more about that one. We're always interested in new products in terms of surfacing. As I said, the warm surfacing is our next sort of priority to try, I think.
Yeah, just to clarify one of those things, if I could share, in terms of Boss Flag, it's particularly good in car parks and permeable pathways, things like that. So it wouldn't necessarily be the best treatment for the highway itself, but from what I understand, it collects through carbon through the way it reacts with water and rain and things.
Yeah, we don't go into different types of things at this meeting. Of the report in front of us, is there something we could put in? Like if new materials comes on the market, then we will make the appropriate inquiries. If it can be added somewhere in there, maybe in there, and I haven't read it.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to put a paragraph on something like that in there. It's because it is what we do. You know, it's what we do in every field. I mean, we're looking at LEDs in public lighting, we've been using fibre reinforced bitumen in our road resurfacing on sort of heavy locations. So we're always looking at new products. Quite happy to put a paragraph in there. It's simple and we do it already. So yeah.
Okay, before I bring you in, Stuart, just in case you want to make a comment, Mike was talking about development sites and all that, but I'm looking at the bigger picture. Is there something that you look into when we get a planning application for something like 1,000 houses, the effect that's going to have on the highway? Because whether we can or can't, we put 106s in for schools. We get pedestrian crossings, things like that put in, but nobody says anything about what will happen to the highways once these houses are built, because it's a massive pressure on the houses. So whether we can do it, I'm not sure, but it could be something that we could put into the report that we will look into if we can. And that's why I kept you up back, Stuart. Perhaps you might like to make a comment on that as well as Phil.
Yeah.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just picking up on a couple of things really. If I just go back to the original one, which was about the street lighting cut downs. There are a number of areas where there were risk assessments taken for the decision to effectively that street lighting wouldn't be required and the columns needed removal from a structural sense. So there'll be a number of those areas where there are no current plans for any replacement programme to happen in those areas. But equally, there are some other columns which have been cut down in areas where in due course there will be some replacements going in. So the difficulty is with the stub columns that are left in place. These are safe, but they're, you know, obviously not ideal having them in there, but there's certainly a cost to their removal, and that's something we just have to consider in the overall priorities of their removal. So it's just to touch on that one. If I can also mention just about EVs in there, that you know, there has been quite a programme of rollout of EVs in our things like our car parks, and there's on-street charging. We're also looking at, I guess, a regional policy for EV charging across the South West Wales region as part of the transport work and metro work that's underway. There's I guess, a more detailed and specific challenge relating to the EV charging from, as I say, the cables from people's property. The technical issues, I know there are some solutions, and I know there's trials, and we're looking into various elements with that. But one of the biggest issues with that relates to the parking itself. That the challenges in a number of these areas, you would end up with some significant parking tensions and difficulties there, because I think with a sort of the ability for someone to run a cable by whatever means for charging, then you also, with it comes the expectation that that parking space suddenly belongs to that property in its own. So there are some really difficult issues to grapple with, which is beyond the technological issue of how you get a cable across. So, you know, that's something much like Bob was talking about, us looking at best practice, you know, all the time, keeping our own best practice across maintenance. It's also an element that we're looking to best practice and emerging sort of trials in other areas. So that's something that's certainly on our radar. You were saying about developments coming along, just in terms of the last one. When there's any proposal, we obviously look at the traffic impact in terms of on the network. So that's the sort of how's the network got the capacity to deal with the vehicles that are being placed, or the different modes. Are there alternatives? So is the public transport and things available? How many trips will be generated? So we can understand, you know, whether the actual number of cars, what it will do to the wider network from a transport modelling side, and what we quite often secure as part of that are certain improvements. So, for example, we could signalise certain junctions, get new systems into place. We might be signalising roundabouts that previously weren't before. So we look to see what we can get in terms of what's reasonably linked to the development to deal with the additional traffic. But what we can't do is sort of say that there'll be, you know, an enhanced maintenance burden from the vehicles driving over our roads at the moment. That's not something that we can sort of really levy against the developers. So we certainly explore all of, you know, the necessary measures in line with our ability from a planning perspective, but we certainly can't levy kind of, I guess, anything relating to the maintenance burden. So if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. You answered the question. It's not what we want to hear, though. Before I bring Andrew in again, nobody else got any questions? The only other comment I've got is the report in front of us. As we know, out and about, it's a lot of work, and you can only do what you get on the budget. And I know Andrew is fighting your case, because there's other priorities within the council, and that's where the big arguments come in. So it's Andrew's fault if you don't get the budget. No pressure there. And yes, you can only do what you got.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to come in, and I was just going to reference what Stuart said on EV. My colleague, Councillor Andrew Lewis, actually covers EV, but I'm working closely with it from a highways perspective, with the involvement with Bob and traffic on looking at what we can do to potentially address this issue with the on-street charging or across pavement charging or whatever. It's, needless to say, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. There's lots of things that we need to look at. I know some of the local authorities and some of the perhaps parish councils in England or what have you have adopted various trials. It's certainly just at this stage something we are heavily looking into, and hopefully have something a way forward, but it's not something we want to rush into either, Jeff. So.
Thank you, Andrew. Last question from me was on the front page on the 1.8. It's got the document is intended to be a static document, which Andrew said earlier on. Overarching document and will be reviewed and updated regularly. I'm not a big lover of the word regularly. I like to put something in there. Is it done annually or is it done biannually?
This document won't be biannual or annual, it will be where needed. I
When
think
needed?
the whole point of the document is overarching, so most of the change will be in, say, the annual status and options report. So we'll be feeding back an annual report that has statistical change, like how we've done, what we're doing, what we're looking at now. Those will be in annual reports on each specific asset. This is meant to be an overall document that says this is how we do things, whereas the actual nitty-gritty of what you do each year will be on a regular basis. So this is intended to be updated when needed or where required, rather than on
I don't
a.
like either of them. But so what do you say? The annual report then will
Yeah.
affect this and change it.
No, this document is overarching. So the document that we reproduce yearly is an annual status report, and that will say, well, this year, for instance, we've grown the highway asset, but the carriageway asset by an extra 6 kilometres. We've done this much schemes. We've invested this much money. These are the new materials we've tried. So they will be done annually. Public lighting terms, it will be we've replaced this many columns. So the feedback on what we do and how we're doing things, what things we're trying, will be in the annual status reports, which are those are the documents we've been continuing to do since the last one of these expired, because we feel they're the sort of the core bit of annual feedback, as it were. This is, as I say, this is supposed to be. We will change it when something significant changes, as required, basically, rather than on a regular basis. I think that's the intention of setting it up in this way, so you don't have to keep going back on the main document. You do changes to all the feeder documents as well as on a much more regular basis. Some will be annual, some will be again as needed. Winter maintenance plan is every year. Safety inspection policy is probably every 2 or 3 years. Annual status report is yearly. It depends on which document, but this is intended to be generally static, but it can change if needed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Anybody else got questions? No. Well, thank you both. Very good report, and let's hope Andrew gets you a good budget. Otherwise, you'll have all the councillors phoning him up for the same problems. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll go on now to the work plan. You've all got a copy of the work plan. The only change is that I get to it. There we are. We've moved the shared prosperity fund into January because there was a problem with LDP 2, which has been moved to February. So those are the only changes. So that's all that's left for me to say is have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and don't drink too much.
Maybe a Merry Christmas to you all as well.
I think the reason why there's not been a lot of added to it because it's a good report and there's nothing really you can add to it because you're trying to do everything you can. Okay, thanks again. That's it, finished.